I'm here with Jeffrey Moore, author of
Crossing the Chasm?
Crossing the Chasm and other ultra-famous business books that we've all read at one point in our life. And what are we going to talk about?
We're going to talk about writing. We're going to talk about writing from the point of view of a writer, and we're going to talk about writing from the point of view of a reader.
And how is that different?
Well, so the writer is trying to express themselves, and the reader is trying to either inform or entertain themselves. The two connect, but if you realize you're actually starting from like San Francisco and Marin and trying to build the Golden Gate Bridge, because the writer really does have a strong need to sort of express their identity or act in the world from some intention they have, and that is not necessarily immediately aligned with the reader. The reader has their own strategic intentions, and they're typically related either to something more pragmatic, like I need to get informed, or something more personal, I want to be entertained or enlightened.
Many times I've read something where I felt that the writer was not aligned with my priorities.
The truth is, much of writing, like much of life, if you can align with the world will actually bring you in. And when you find the world is not bringing you in, it is often because you have not bothered to align with it.
Right. And so, I guess within these contexts, is there a different way of thinking about writing or what writing is? Or
Yeah, so if you're a writer, you want to think about writing as a process. It's a creative process, and we've developed some frameworks and models around 7 steps of it, but it's like anything
and this is
else.
while people don't know, other than being an ultra-famous business book writer, you were a writing professor.
I was. I taught writing for 10 years, and in the process of that, developed a set of frameworks to help not only myself write, but the professors at the college where I was teaching, help them also organize their teaching of writing. And so that's where all this work was originated. And basically, the first piece of it was to distinguish between grading themes, which is what the professors first thought was about, which is actually about writing as a product, and that's what readers care about,
Right,
because
the reader
that's what
cares
the
about
reader
the product.
experiences the product, and you can talk about various aspects of the product and say that they're A quality, B quality, C quality, or flunking or whatever, and we'll talk a bunch about that under product. But what students cared about was writing as a process. How could they better express themselves? How could they be more successful in the world? And so the process models tended to be around an arc of creation from sort of invention through to publishing. And the product models were more around a set of values that are very traditional. They go all the way back to the Greeks and Romans. And the goal there was to give them a model which says, well, how many different aspects of this of good writing do you have to understand, and how do you focus to get mastery?
And so just as an example, like, what would be an example process that you would...
Well, so a process might start with they often talk about pre-writing. You even step back and do one. I'll give you the 7 steps we talk about. So the first one is typically called assessing, and that is like, what's the writing situation? Am I writing a letter to my grandmother for money? Am I texting to a girlfriend? Am I writing a theme for a professor? And basically, the work that we were doing was the freshman writing requirement. So the idea was this is college-level writing to help you in your social sciences and liberal arts work. So assess the writing situation. So what's the topic? What is my strategic intent as a writer? Who is my putative reader? Who am I expecting to read this? Then we go into an invention mode, and the invention mode is a very freewheeling thing, and personal styles are so different that when different people invent, some people are very structured in the way they like to go after this. Some people are very unstructured. Some people like to procrastinate. Some people like to plan ahead. I mean, it's all different styles. So the invention, and so we had a series of frameworks saying, depending on your style, you might try this one or that one. And eventually you want somebody to find one that they say, okay, that feels like me.
And which, I mean, everyone's got a different process, but in general, you're saying inventions when you're finally you're putting something down, not necessarily writing necessarily. Some people might, so they might actually start writing immediately. Some people might outline. Some people might jot notes.
Exactly. People normally call that pre-writing, and if you just literally start writing immediately, they often call that free writing because you don't really quite know where you're going.
Right.
When you go from invent to organize, the key transition is you pull out of the invention material, however you've put it on the paper, some key sentences that you're saying, okay, these are the key points that and you're typically writing an essay in the freshman in the college English requirement. So in my essay, I'm going to make these points, and we often call them the thesis sentence, which is the sort of the overall point of the essay, and topic sentences, which were the points of just each paragraph. And organizing is about getting those sentences in the right relationship to each other and figuring out how much support each of these claims is going to need and stuff like that. And then you go to drafting it. You actually write the middle paragraphs, you write a conclusion, you go back and write an introduction, and you're essentially turning it into words that are now intended to be read. So now at this point, it's almost like I'm talking to you right now. I'm trying to be understood. I'm trying to figure out what's going on, but it's still extemporaneous. You're still making mistakes. You're still going back and saying, I didn't really say that quite right.
And so just an example, I mean, and once again, this is very particular to different people. Everyone could have a completely different process, but this is at least an example of one. Invent, you might write down some words, outline. Organize, you start to take the bullet points in your outline and structure them. Say, hey, these would kind of support one paragraph right over here. Let's throw those together because they're all putting back the point about why I should get paid more or whatever it should be. And then draft is the first time you actually try to write sentences here.
I think that's right. If anybody uses software from Microsoft, Organize looks a lot more like PowerPoint, and Draft looks a lot more like Word.
I see.
Sort of, that's kind of where we are. But it's Word before I've done spell check.
Right.
Okay. So drafting is just at the end of the draft, what you'd like to say is somewhere on the page, I've gotten most of my ideas out.
Yeah. And at least from my memory of writing papers in school, this is once you're done with the draft phase, your stress goes down.
Way down.
You've got something.
Way down. Now, even if you know it's not good enough. Now, in fact, the people that struggle the most with writing are the ones that won't let themselves write a bad draft.
Right.
And
I'm excellent at writing a bad draft. I have no trouble with that.
Actually, that turns out to be a huge skill. Because if you can write a bad draft, then you or other people can help you during the next stage we call the review stage.
Right.
And in the review stage, you can improve. Now, the difference between when I went to school and the current curriculum is huge, and I think it's terrific. When I went to school, you had to review and edit your own work, and there was never anybody else involved. That's extremely difficult and, frankly, not a very good idea. It's far better to have your work peer reviewed, and so the best writing instruction now uses peer review groups, typically 2 or 3 or 4 people in a pod, and they read each other's drafts, and they give each other feedback about it. And you have to learn, among other things, the protocol and the sort of the decorum of giving feedback. Like, you can't just say
your writing sucks.
Exactly, your writing sucks.
Give up.
That's sort of the Bill Gates style, but that's not the style I would.
He's not always like that.
No, he's not. No, he's a very kind man now. But he was very. But when he was doing, if it was software, he was.
I've heard stories.
He was
about
pretty
that,
clear.
Yes.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But the truth is, at the margin, better to get true feedback with bad style than to get false feedback with a grin. And
that's what we say here at Khan Academy before we do reviews. We say feedback is a gift.
Yeah, it is a gift, and sometimes it's not wrapped in the paper you were hoping, but whatever it is. So there's a review thing, and then you do the editing based on the review. And the editing, and again, with the world of software now, we have more editing tools that help us. So there is spell checker, there's style checker, there's stuff you can use during the editing thing that will help you. And then the final thing is publishing, and we have wonderful stuff for publishing now. I mean, you have all these gorgeous things, whether it's blog publishing with WordPress or whether it's just making something beautiful in Word, or even
that's formatting, footnoting, font selection.
For sure, for the college, absolutely. For the college, there's a set of conventions. How do you do a bibliography?
Yeah.
How do you do all that kind of stuff? And also, I think just increasingly now, people are realizing the cosmetics of presentation, particularly now that we're all in this consumerized web world, and it's a digital world. It's kind of unacceptable now to not look pretty good because there's all these tools to make you look good.
Right. Now this is interesting. I mean, and I emphasize, like the way I write, I kind of go into that free writing phase very quickly. But I think I am implicitly doing a lot of I'm kind of doing an outline, although it might be a little bit messier than what a lot of folks would consider an outline.
And I think you also are very thoughtful in your assessment. So you and I have talked over the years, and I think going back to your nephew and niece or the first tutoring you started with, you were assessing their situation, and then you were thinking about ways that you could communicate, and you actually modified your medium, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
You were in one medium and you switched to another medium, sync to async, or you eventually got on YouTube. And I think that was all a response to assessing the writing situation. And then you're inventing. Now, I'd be curious. So when you're going to do a new topic, how do you prepare the material before you actually start the video session?
No, that's interesting. I mean, this is just a conversation about writing, but we're really just talking about communicating with folks.
Yeah.
And obviously that's something that I hope I'm doing a good bit of with the videos. And you're right. And this is what I tell a lot of people when they want to make videos is I spend a ton of time right over here. I mean, to some degree, especially in the math, I might have spent the last 12 years or 15 years or 20 years of my education thinking about what's a way to distill these concepts, what's an easier way to communicate these concepts. When I'm doing things like a history, and I've been doing a lot of history lately, World War I, et cetera, I spend a lot of time assessing it. What are the key ideas here? What are the things that really matter for people to get the big picture? And then I do on the invention, especially in history, just so I'm horrible at spelling, I kind of do write a couple of bullet points of what I think are the big ideas. So if I'm like minute 4 into a video, I'm like, oh, I forgot to talk about the Battle of Caporetto. That's the most important point of this whole video. Let it trigger my brain. So I actually, you're right. I do a lot on this side, more than I probably admit often.
Yep.
And actually a reasonable bit right over here.
I think so too. And then the other thing that's kind of fun about your videos, from my point of view, is you don't worry too much about being on the bottom part of this hierarchy. You're willing to let the draft. In fact, it's a little bit like watching Julia Child cook on television when she dropped the turkey and then just had to pick it up. I mean, there's a sense of like this is hey, we're all in this together. It's a real world, and so rather than get these artifacts which are impeccable but very distant.
Right. And so there's a fun, I guess, what's the opposite of irony? A reinforcing thing here that we're doing this right now as we speak. That what we've just produced is kind of a draft.
It's right. It is a draft, and I think the editing and the reviewing and publishing is more going back and saying, okay, so this could be just a little vignette conversation with Jeff Moore and Sal Khan. This could say, no, I'm going to actually use this in part of a structured curriculum. Okay, then you in the review, revise, editing, and publishing, you start thinking about, well, do I want to break this into 2 parts? Do I want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Very cool. Well, this is neat. We're already beyond the allotted 10 minutes, which we tend to give ourselves here at Khan Academy. So let's talk about the reader side in the next video.
Okay, sounds good.